We'll get down to business, but first, I want to officially say welcome to convention, everybody. We have been waiting to say that for a very long 3 years, so we are so glad to see so many friendly, familiar faces and all of the new faces in this long 3 years since we've all gotten together. So excited to be with you over these next few days. Okay, so before we talk through each of the legislative proposals, knowing that we have a lot of new faces here, I want to describe just a little bit about how legislation works at the National Convention for everybody. What's going to happen over the course of the next few days. So in this session right here is where we officially introduce the legislation. So we go through each of the proposals so that when you walk out of here today, you have an understanding of what you are going to be asked to vote on in a few days at the business meeting. So we'll introduce the legislation here and describe it to you, its implications, those sorts of things. Then on Monday morning, we'll have what we call the General Caucus. And that's an opportunity to all come here together, ask questions, make commentary, advocate for or against different proposals, and for everybody to hear all of those kind of together. So you'll have some of that question and commentary and discussion in committee meetings or in hallway conversations down in the lobby, those types of things. But we also encourage you to do that here to make sure that how you or a group of your peers are thinking about proposals is known and shared with the rest of the body. So that would happen Monday morning. Then we have what we call committee or association caucuses or straw poll votes. That's when the Athletic Directors Association, as an example, or the Faculty Athletic Representatives Association, they would get together and do a straw poll vote on each piece of legislation so that it can be read out to the full body so you can see, how do the athletic directors feel about this particular proposal? How do the FARs feel about this particular proposal? And so on. So some of those will happen over the course of the next couple of days, but will all be completed by Monday night and then be able to be shared with all of you at the business meeting on Tuesday. And so when we get to that business meeting on Tuesday, that's when we will officially hear all of the legislative proposals. Again, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions or advocate for or against any proposals, and then we'll vote. And that's where we'll do our business as an association. So that's how this is going to go over the course of the next couple of days. Typically, the way that we would do this session is I would stand up here and talk to all of you about each proposal. This year we're trying something just a little bit new. So unfortunately, you don't completely get to avoid listening to me talk about them. You just won't listen to me talk about them live. We're actually going to show the video clips that we put together in advance just to be a little bit more efficient. So with that, we'll get into our proposals. I'll take it. This year, we do not have any constitutional amendments being proposed, meaning our first proposal is a bylaws proposal. This deals with beach volleyball and how we establish it within the NAIA. So as many of you may know, beach volleyball has been growing in terms of its sponsorship within the NAIA, and we have policies in place for how a sport can grow from emerging to invitational, then to championship level sports. So beach volleyball has now been an invitational sport for a couple of years, and it's time for us to establish those regulations for should it soon become a championship level sport. So here, what is being proposed is essentially mirroring the types of limits and regulations that we become accustomed to in men's volleyball and applying them for beach volleyball. So those are things like frequency of play limits established as 26 contest dates. It's also number of scrimmage dates, so 2 scrimmage dates being established as well. And additionally, we see the same sorts of start dates for both practice and competitions that we're used to on the men's volleyball side. Our next proposal again deals with frequency of play limitations, this time in the sport of golf, and it has to do with golf's start date for competitions. So currently that regulation says that for the sport of golf, golf can begin to compete on the 4th Thursday in August. Under this proposal, that would shift to become the 4th Monday in August. The thought being from the Golf Coaches Associations that proposal would buy just a few more days of time for competition in the fall, which tends to be fairly condensed for those teams that might be pursuing a competitive schedule in the fall. So even just a 3-day difference could be beneficial for golf. This proposal again deals with the frequency of play limits, but this proposal is not specific to a particular sport as much as it is talking about any of those spring sports that might happen to hold a qualifying competition for its affiliated conference or the Continental Athletic Conference in the fall term, and looking to make some adjustments for any teams that might fall into that category. So what we're talking about here are spring sports, meaning a sport that would traditionally hold its national championship in the spring and generally probably its regular season in the spring. But we see that in a few sports specifically, maybe golf and tennis is where we've seen this happen a few times. We have some of our affiliated conferences or potentially the Continental Athletic Conference that might choose to hold their qualifying event towards the national championship, hold that in the fall. And in those situations, what those teams are saying is we'd like a little bit more time to prepare and begin to practice, knowing that we have something on the line here in the fall. It's not just about the spring for those teams. So the request is to change the start date for practice for those teams to now saying they can have 17 days prior to the first allowable competition in the fall to begin to practice, not to proceed August 1st. So if it happens to be one of those calendar years where everything kind of falls early, we want to ensure that at earliest, the team could only begin to practice August 1st, but 17 days prior to the first allowable competition is what the new language would read as. This next proposal deals with the Declaration of Intent, or the DOI. So the DOI is how an institution tells the national office and its conference, here are the sports that my institution is going to be sponsoring this coming year, and whether we wish to participate in postseason if selected or not. So currently, the deadline for that DOI submission is April 1st. So it has to be submitted to the national office by April 1st prior to the academic year beginning in August. What this proposal would do is say, we're going to make that more of a declaration window or a range. And that range would begin on April 1st, but would actually run all the way through June 1st, giving institutions a little bit more time to make those decisions about what sports they may be sponsoring for the coming year. This is permissible or would work within the other structures that rely on those declarations of intent, now that the National Administrative Council has changed some of its timing and the way that it does business, so that the National Administrative Council would still have time over the summer to review institutions' declarations of intent and make the determinations it has to make, like qualification plans, over the summer. So the intention here is that institutions could begin to submit as early as April 1, but for those that might be making some decisions about sponsoring new sports perhaps, or things like that, it would give them just a little bit of extra time to make those decisions. This next proposal deals with what it means to be an affiliated conference and how an affiliated conference is able to receive automatic qualification bids to the national championship. So for a conference to be considered an affiliated conference, to get all the rights and privileges that come with that title, there's several requirements it has to meet. One of which says that conference must have 6 institutions as full members of the conference. What this proposal first seeks to do is to provide a bit of a grace period if we were to have an affiliate conference drop from 6 or more members down to 5 member institutions. And it says that should that happen, the conference should be able to continue to be treated like an affiliated conference for 2 years, basically a 2-year grace period of sorts, recognizing that it can give the conference a little additional time to sort of get itself back up to 6 or more member institutions, and out of fairness to the student athletes, recognizing that you may have many student athletes who sort of have come to rely on being at an institution that is a member of an affiliated conference and the various things that go along with that. So the secondary portion of this proposal would also say that while in this 2-year grace period, that affiliate conference would continue to retain any first automatic qualifier bids that it has to the national championship in sports where it has already held them. So as an example, if a conference went from 6 member institutions to 5 member institutions, and previously it had 6 teams playing men's soccer, and now it was down to 5 teams playing men's soccer, this proposal would say that conference can Previously would have had an automatic qualification bid to the national championship by having 6 members. And during this grace period, it can continue to retain that bid to the national championship, even though it would only have 5 teams playing men's soccer. So a couple of things to note about this proposal. It specifies that this would only continue to apply while the conference has at least 5 member institutions. So if that conference was dropped from not just 6 member institutions to 5, but even lower than 5, this would go away. It would no longer continue to be treated like an affiliated conference and no longer continue to have that automatic qualification bid. It should also be noted that this is specific just to the first automatic qualifier. So if we had a situation in which a conference had 6 or more full member institutions, dropped down to 5, but had lots of per sport institutions or members in that particular sport, where it might have had even more than one automatic qualifier bid at first. This proposal only protects the first AQ. Again, the reason is recognizing that the intention is to give that conference a little bit of time to see if it can make itself whole, get itself back to 6 or more member institutions, and provide a little bit of a buffer time period for all the student athletes involved, some of whom have certainly been making their decisions about colleges to attend and those various things related to opportunities to play in the national championship, as an example, and recognizing that some of those students are not going to be in a position, as they may be juniors or even seniors, to transfer to look for a new opportunity. It's also capped at 2 years with the intention that that conference should have a little bit of time to try to make itself whole, but this is not a sort of permanent or unending type of an exception. Our next proposal deals with the Conduct and Ethics Committee and its authority as it reviews an appeal of a suspension, that suspension coming from when a player or a coach has been ejected from a contest. I want to clarify that we're only talking about those suspensions that are a result of the NAIA rule. So some places where the NAIA has said when somebody's ejected, we want to see that that person is then suspended for a game or more based on that conduct. I'm not talking about those suspensions that are specifically dictated by the sport rule. So the rule book that governs the sport of soccer or the rule book that governs the sport of baseball. We're not talking about any of those sport-required suspensions. So when the NAIA rule is the one that has required some sort of a suspension of a coach or a player, the National Conduct and Ethics Committee can review an appeal of that suspension. And what this proposal would do is clarify that the National Conduct and Ethics Committee could affirm that suspension, it could remove the suspension altogether, or it could choose to modify the suspension, meaning address fewer or more games required for the individual to be suspended. So this is really intended to give the Conduct and Ethics Committee a little bit more discretion and sort of allow that human element of review to these sorts of suspensions. The ejection itself cannot be appealed or reviewed, and that continues to stand. That's not changed by this proposal. Our next proposal deals with the composition or the makeup of the National Conduct and Ethics Committee. This proposal would seek to add one athletics compliance administrator to the committee, as well as one faculty athletic representative to the committee. The reason behind this proposal and the rationale from the sponsors is looking to include athletic compliance administrators within the committee makeup, but also recognizing that we likely need an uneven or an odd number of individuals on the committee, recognizing that the committee deals with a lot of cases, whether those are violations or appeals, and so there's a lot of voting. And having an odd number of individuals is ideal. So to balance out that additional athletic compliance administrator, the proposal seeks to also add one faculty athletic representative to keep the committee at an odd number. Our next proposal again relates to committee composition or the structure of a standing committee, but this time we're talking about the Competitive Experience Committee. So what this proposal does is it would again increase the number of members on the Competitive Experience Committee by adding one compliance administrator, but also to again make sure that we continue to have an odd number, It would add, in addition to the compliance administrator, it would also add one additional athletics director to the competitive experience committee. This proposal again deals with the composition of one of our standing committees, this time the National Eligibility Committee. So this committee currently has 5 members who are either faculty athletic representatives and/or conference eligibility chairs. So this committee really does probably need to stay at about 5 members so that it can be relatively nimble, as this committee deals with a couple of hundred cases every year, either appeals or requests for exceptions, those sorts of things. So in this case, the way the sponsors are seeking to adjust the composition is to say, take that number from 5 FARs or conference eligibility chairs down to 4, and instead replace that 5th member with one of our members of the Athletic Compliance Administrators Association. So you would continue to keep the group at a maximum number of 5 individuals, and you would just sub in one of the members as one of our compliance administrators. Our last proposal today is again dealing with the composition of one of our standing committees. This time it's the NAIA Rise Committee. So that name might sound a little bit unfamiliar to you, and that's for a good reason. So historically, the NAIA has had, as one of its standing committees, the Leadership, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. Well, over the last couple of years, there was some great work starting out of the Conference Commissioners Association to form a group called RISE, focused on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that group was growing to include others outside of the commissioners group. It was including athletics directors and others, and was also really beginning to kind of move into this diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So with the approval of the Council of Presidents, what we essentially did was merge those 2 groups. So the Leadership, Diversity, and Inclusion Standing Committee that we had, along with this group, or this RISE group coming out of the Conference Commissioners Association. The Council of Presidents does have the authority to essentially adjust that standing committee structure, as this is a group that reports up to the Council of Presidents. So we were able to actually merge those 2 groups together. So the proposal in front of you today is actually just seeking to adjust the membership within that NAIA Rise Standing Committee. So what it would do is take the current number of at-large members on that group, which would be 5, and adjust that down to 4, and replace that additional spot with 1 member of our Athletic Compliance Administrators Association. This year, just a couple of quick notes. On the app, you can find the full text of all of the legislation. You can also find an FAQ document where you can see additional information, some of which would have been discussed in here, but some additional implications and what about this, what about that types of questions. You can find both of those things on the app. Also on the NAIA's webpage, the convention legislation page has those documents. It also has what we call the Naia Forum, which is basically kind of like a message board type of online utility where if you wanted to ask questions or make comments, you could do that, and it's visible to all of membership. So that's another opportunity. You could also see these video clips there if you would like to review anything. So all of those are resources that are at your disposal over the course of this convention in case you need any of it. And with that, I think we are done with the legislation for today, and we'll see you again in a couple of days to talk more about legislation. Thank you all so much.